Mass Effect Andromeda was originally released March 21st of 2017 by BioWare. It was the newest storyline in the already established Mass Effect universe, following up the first trilogy of 3 games. Now, when it was released, it was met with mediocre reviews, only receiving a 71% on Metacritic, compared to Mass Effect 3's 93% rating. Now, these poor reviews were based on a mix of early animation bugs and controversy that had surrounded the game since early release trailers. This controversy was based around social justice topics such as inclusivity and Indigenous politics presented within the game. Now, as a Canadian, Indigenous politics are part of our everyday discussion, particularly here on the West Coast where I live. Instead of controversy, I saw the game exploring important modern issues, and this is best demonstrated through the contextual narrative surrounding 2 key missions: A Trail for Hope and Uncovering the Past. For some short definitions, contextual narrative is the background information that a player brings to inform the existing or embedded narrative of the game. The embedded narrative of Mass Effect Andromeda is relatively linear. You play Ryder, who is a customizable character and pathfinder of the initiative. Your goal is to locate and colonize planets for settlers to live on, but in the process you're caught in a conflict between 2 alien species, the invasive Ket and native Angaran people, the latter of which you side with in order to defeat your shared enemy. Through the contextual narrative and my own Canadian perspective, the Ket provide an excellent example of past colonialism, which is particularly enforced in the aforementioned mission, Trail of Hope. To start off, Trail of Hope is very similar to the term Trail of Tears, which was the forced migration of Native American peoples through the states from their ancestral lands to reservations. However, to continue this metaphor of colonization, you discover that the Ket are using a religious and scientific process to literally turn the Angaran into themselves. Now, this is extremely reminiscent of the Canadian residential school system. For those who are unaware, the residential school system was where First Nations children were taken from their cultures into Christian schools where they attempt to erase their culture and assimilate them into that of the colonizers. Along with this, there are many cases of abuse and neglect for the children in these areas. Now, presenting this through the eyes of the Ket and therefore separating it from the player allows for a level of defamiliarization, which allows the player to look at this from the outside and see the reality without any potential cultural filters. And this outside perspective is therefore enforced by the internal, also known as the emic perspective, of your companion Jal, an Indigenous Angaran, if you choose to bring him along. Now, my next example, the mission Uncovering the Past, is also based on contextual narrative, but in this case, the contextual narrative of my experience as an archaeology student. Now, in this mission, you're adventuring on the planet Vold, and while freeing Angarans enslaved by the Ket, you discover an ancient AI that contains information from past Angaran society that had been abandoned when they fled the Ket invasion. Now, this AI immediately threatens to kill an Angaran soldier currently with you, but if Jal is present, he will encourage you to allow it to do so in order to save the AI's data. At this point, you can either save the AI or the Angaran. I found this to be one of the more complex moral issues in the game: save one life or the work of potentially thousands that lived before. Ultimately, I chose the AI. Now, even after this original choice, you are still presented with 2 options. You can either keep the AI for yourself or return it to the Angaran people. Now, this reminded me of a common conflict within archaeology. A lot of times with Indigenous remains, there's controversy about the importance of their research, and this is most prominently known about with the case of the Chenook Man. The Chenook Man was human remains that are considered to be over 10,000 years old and potentially from the initial colonization of North America. However, they were found on the property and traditional lands of the Umatilla people. Now, in the game, you are given 2 choices. You can act like the scientists in real life and keep the information for yourself, or you can return it to the people who it came from, returning knowledge lost after violent colonization. Personally, I chose to return it, and the game actually rewarded this decision in the final battle by having the Angaran army assist me and use the AI to save a companion. I think what these 2 missions and the contextual narrative of Mass Effect Andromeda present is best summed up by Ian Bogost. As citizens of the real world, players can reflect on the game as an allegory. And this is what BioWare has presented in Mass Effect Andromeda. They've expertly used the Ket to force settler populations to reevaluate their interpretation and better understand the horror of colonization, which they can then take back with them into the real world when looking at modern day issues.